Remember to like, share, and subscribe if you like what you see. I want to start off by saying I am a military veteran, so much doesn't scare me. But this is a true story that happened a while back and is still something I am traumatized by to this very day. Many years ago, I decided to go on a camping trip with my brother and my good friend Andrew. Andrew's uncle had a property in the mountains about 45 minutes from where we lived, so we decided to go there and find a spot on his property to camp. After arriving to his uncle's house, he allowed us to camp about a mile behind his house, since it was a clearing that would prevent fires. Upon leaving, a friend of Andrew's uncle stopped us at the door and informed us that there has been an unusual case of missing people within the last year or so. He told us to be extremely cautious and careful, and that the local gas station has a board with all the missing people's pictures posted on it. He told us that this side of the foothills used to be a ceremonial ground for Native American tribes, and that police recently found a couple who went missing while hiking and were utterly mutilated. Since then, rumors began to spread about a native ghost tribe. Being gullible 16-year-old kids, we believed this and were obviously frightened, but we decided to set up camp anyways. The day goes by and we finish setting up our tents as the sun starts to set. All three of us sat around the campfire until we started to get tired and went to lay down inside the tent. By this time, my brother had fallen asleep. Andrew and I, on the other hand, were still awake. We were quietly chatting, quiet enough not to wake up my brother, when suddenly we heard what sounded like footsteps near our campsite. Andrew reached for a gun we had that his uncle gave us in case of mountain lions or snakes. He unzipped the tent and stepped outside. Suddenly, the steps became louder, as if they were running straight towards us. Andrew fired a shot into the air and the tracks immediately went quiet, as if whatever it was just disappeared. Andrew crawled back into the tent, and we all tried our best to sleep. The following morning, we talked about it, coming to a conclusion that it was probably just a coyote or a small mountain lion. The day passed and we had all been exhausted from the night before, so we decided we were going to turn in early. Andrew explained to us that he wanted to sleep at his uncle's house tonight, but assured us that it was alright for us to stay up here. My brother and I decided we would camp out for one more night and return home tomorrow. Waving Andrew goodbye as he walked down the crude path, we crawled into our tent and laid down. After about 30 minutes, I started to hear something in the distance. I couldn't believe my own ears. I heard drums. As if someone was using a primitive deerskin drum. My brother turned to me and whispered,
"I'm not trying to scare you, but do you hear that?"
I responded with,
"Yeah, drums, right?"
He immediately responded with,
"We should go."
At this point in time, I started to hear those familiar footsteps again, but it sounded like there were more than one of whatever visited us last night. These footsteps began to circle around the tent, and we began to hear low verbal humming, grunting, and chanting. My brother and I looked at each other and began to count down from 5.
5, 4, 3, 2.
Before we hit 1, I darted out of the tent with my brother immediately behind me, running through a moonlight path. The tree smacked us in our faces and thorns caught on our clothes as if they didn't want us to leave. We had nothing but pure instinct leading us towards Andrew's uncle's house. When we found ourselves back at his uncle's house, they were outside, gathered around a fire, staring at us. his uncle called out to us.
"What's wrong? You guys look like you've seen a ghost."
We were at a loss for words. We were still catching our breaths, sweating profusely and panting like dogs. After catching our breaths, we explained to them what happened, but none of them believed us and began to laugh at our story. Now, being older, we spent a lot of time in the inner woods doing extensive camping trips. And we still have yet to experience anything remotely similar to that incident. Every time my brother and I talk about this, we both relive the fear that we experienced years ago, both of us unable to fathom what really happened.
Back when I was 19, I had a summer date with my friend. Let's call him Mike. I didn't believe that he liked me, and since I took the initiative of asking him out, I had made all the plans. Well, living in this rural town, I am not exaggerating when I say there is nothing to do. The outskirts of town had a huge Celtic cemetery. The cemetery was a go-to place for people to play some witchcraft, call spirits, perform seances, and the like. Like I said, there isn't much to do here. Anyways, right beside the cemetery, there is this large forest with a hill that looks down on the cemetery. That was the location of our little date. My date idea was to meet up at night, grab some booze. Here, the legal age is 18. Hop on a bus and head into the forest. Flash forward to our date night. We got to the top of the hill, drank a lot of alcohol, and got pretty drunk quickly. We began laughing and poking fun at the people down in the cemetery, doing whatever the hell they were trying to do. Well, one thing led to another, and Mike and I ended up making out. I don't know how much time went by, but the next thing I know, there are about a dozen people dressed in dark red robes surrounding us. They began chanting and saying something incohesive. The few words I could pick out were welcome, spirit, and world. Suddenly, one of them took a step towards us, placed some bread in front of us, and led the group away. Mike and I looked at each other in confusion, wondering what the hell just happened. We assumed they were just pranking us and thought nothing of it. The night went on as we stayed at the top of the hill, chatting and trying to sober up. Not long after, we noticed that everyone down at the cemetery had left and gone home, and that we were the last ones in the vicinity. Mike suggested that we leave, so we packed our things and I led the way. While walking down the hill, a sudden strong gust of cold wind struck us as if it wanted to shove us off the path. Mind you, it was during summer when the wind would be timid and warm. Chills began crawling up my spine, and Mike, as confident as he was, became agitated. Both of us had this heavy feeling that something was out there in the woods watching us, watching every step we took. I became more and more tense as I led the way, and the wind became more and more aggressive, as if having a life of its own. The whole situation was just abnormal and creepy. Out of nowhere, Mike spoke up. "What happens if you call spirits and bring them into this world? How do they get back? They need to go back, right?" It was at this time when I realized that we were completely lost. not being as sober as I thought it was, and the night being pitch black didn't help. Moreover, this was before either of us had cell phones, so we were more hopeless than we thought. We figured that the best way out was just to keep walking down the hill and find a road in hopes of having a bus stop and hop onto a night bus. My legs began moving faster and faster into a full sprint as Mike followed me closely. It must have been past 1 in the morning when we managed to reach a bus stop. However, even when we got to the stop, the creepy, heavy feeling did not leave us. We still felt like there was something with us, something with malice and evil intent. We sat there at the bus bench for what felt like an eternity, with no sign of any bus coming. In the distance, we saw a figure walking towards us. He looked like just some average guy. He came right up to us, sat beside us, and began talking. We didn't respond to him, but we did acknowledge his presence. At one point, he says, "Well, the bus doesn't seem like it's going to come. Let's go to a closer village. There will definitely be a bus there." We didn't really have another choice but to follow this man. It was either sit and wait at this bus stop with the dreadful presence of a malice entity watching us, as if ready to strike at us, or put our trust into this stranger and hope for the best. And that was what we did. We followed him. However, since we weren't entirely comfortable with this stranger, we stayed a good meter behind him as he led the way. Every now and then, he would turn around and just smile at us. It wasn't a creepy smile, but it wasn't a friendly one either. Well, the disturbing thing was that the more he turned around and smiled, the larger the smile would be. I began regretting the choice of following him, as he began giving creepier and creepier vibes. Mike, on the other hand, seemed unfazed. After walking for what felt like an hour or two, we found ourselves in another forest. The guy suddenly turns around and asks us, "You two were at the Celtic cemetery, right?" Mike and I nodded in response. He pauses for a solid few seconds, then says, "You want to see one more? I know where another one is. It's just here in the middle of this forest." Being as tired as both of us were, and disliking the vibe this man gave out, Mike and I said no. He pauses for a few seconds again, but this time he began grinning wider. The color on his face became paler as his grin became larger. He then demands, "No, you will go with me and join my friends there." Suddenly, he pulls his large knife from his pocket. We freak out and begin sprinting away from him. This creep begins chasing us, waving his knife and screaming at the top of his lungs. We ran and ran, and luckily, out in the distance, we saw headlights. Without a second thought, Mike and I ran towards the direction of the headlights. We got on the road and jumped in front of the car. The driver luckily stopped. All the while, Mike and I were frantically yelling and pointing towards the forest. The driver let us in his car, and we told him that this creepy guy with a knife was threatening us and began chasing us as we ran. Maybe it was our body language or our scared voices, but he believed us and began to drive off. I instinctively looked back, and I kid you not, that creepy guy stood in the middle of the road, as still as a statue, with a knife in hand, staring at me. In the end, the driver gave us a ride to our houses, and we thanked him constantly.
To this very day, Mike and I believed that the guy with a knife was possessed by something out of this world. This is a true story that happened to me back when I was 9 years old. For a bit of context, I am a female born in Romania. It was a school day when me and my friend both decided to ditch class. In the back of our school is this wooded area. In this wooded area is an abandoned house. We felt brave that day, having brought a Ouija board. The house was really old and creepy. It had disturbing and creepy drawings on the walls, and even had a handful of satanic circles on the walls and floors. To experience something supernatural or paranormal with the Ouija board, but we had no luck. We stayed there for hours and hours, playing with the Ouija board, when we realized that the day had passed. After chatting with my friend, we both decided to stay the night at the abandoned house. I texted my parents saying that I was going to stay over at a friend's place. This friend was just someone we both made up, and not the friend that I was with. At the same time, my friend texted her parents that she was staying over at said imaginary friend's place too. The both of us lied that we were going to have a pajama party. It was a foolproof plan. After chatting and playing around for a few more hours, we both decided to go to sleep. We headed to the back of the house, where a room was big enough for the both of us to lie down. Well, we must have laid down for an hour or so. All of a sudden, I began feeling uneasy, as if something bad was going to happen. I opened my eyes and looked around the room. In the door frame of the room was this old lady, looking like she was in her 40s. She had dark brown hair, a large frown, and very dark circles under her glowing green eyes. I could see something shining in her hand thanks to the moonlight. Well, that shining thing in her hand turned out to be a pocket knife. I screamed at the top of my lungs and dragged my friend out of the house. We both ran as fast and as far as possible from the house. After a few days, I had partially forgotten about the incident. I was washing my dishes in the kitchen, which faced the backyard. In the corner of my eyes, I saw a woman in my backyard, just smiling. Luckily, my parents were home, so I ran to them and told them that there was this weirdo in our backyard. Of course, when my dad went to check it out, she was nowhere to be found. Not too long after, my family and I had moved. After settling into our new house, my parents had received news that my best friend went missing. It is incredibly eerie, especially knowing that a strange woman had shown up in my backyard not too long ago. I'm quite sure she had something to do with my missing best friend, but I have no evidence to back this up. To this day, I don't know what that woman wanted from me, but she sure gave me nightmares for a very long time. When I was a kid, I used to go to summer camp every year. It was one of those things I really looked forward to every year since I loved camping. One year, I had a particularly weird experience that was one of those situations that was both scary at the time and, in some ways, kind of funny when looking back upon it. Back when I was 14, I was assigned to a cabin with several other boys, like in other years. A couple I knew from past years. A few I didn't. One particular boy was a guy named Wade. He was kind of weird, in an almost but not quite nerdy way. Like the kind of guy who liked to play sports, but who also liked D&D, and who would fire off random trivia. He was there with his fraternal twin brother, but because of some snafu on the part of the camp, they had been assigned to different cabins even though siblings who were close in age were normally assigned to the same cabin, barring a specific request otherwise. We had bunk beds in the cabins, and each chose our bed early on, and as fate would have it, I got the bottom bunk and Wade wound up on the top. That night, when it came time for bed, we all turned in. I had a bit of trouble falling asleep. About 20 minutes or so after we'd all gotten into bed, the unmistakable sounds of a guy beating himself started coming from the bunk above me. Now, at that age, I did it too, so I wasn't one to hold it against someone for doing the same thing. But Wade was, well, not really going to town, but he was making no effort to keep quiet about what he was doing. He went on for several minutes before rather obviously reaching his, climax, after which things got quiet again, and soon I fell asleep. The next morning, after we were all up and making our beds, I noticed that Wade was the only one not around, so I made an admittedly crude joke to the other guys about how he'd really been having fun the previous night. The others all looked at me in confusion, and one asked what I meant. I commented, once again, about how Wade had been pleasuring himself rather loudly after we were all in bed. Everyone still looked puzzled, and I said, "Surely, at least one of you must have heard Wade getting his rocks off." After a moment, one of the other guys said that at the last minute, another camper in Wade's brother's cabin had cancelled, and since a spot was less available in that cabin, Wade had moved over there the previous afternoon. He had never slept in our cabin. Baffled, I looked up at the top bunk to see just a bare mattress, and glancing down to where Wade had dropped his stuff the previous morning, I noticed that his stuff was gone. I was now as confused as everyone else had been a few moments ago. If Wade had never been up there, then who'd been pleasuring himself above me the night before? The other boys laughed and accused me of dreaming the whole thing up. But when I later mentioned it to one of the counselors there, he grew quiet for a few moments before saying that there has been a story going around the camp for many years of a teenage boy who had drowned to death and whose bed had been the one above mine. As the story went, his ghost supposedly haunted that cabin, but the counselor, like many other people, had always dismissed it as nothing more than a story told around the campfire. That is, until now. Now, granted, I don't know that I hadn't actually fallen asleep and just dreamt the whole thing, just like my cabin mates had accused me of doing. I know it sounds quite absurd, but it seems so real, and I am positive that I was wide awake when it all happened.
I have always been good friends with one of my cousins, who we'll call Cole, who's the same age as I am. The two of us were not quite inseparable, but we always did get along very well together. And were often found together, both in school, as we'd always wound up in the same class together throughout elementary school, and outside of it. When we were 12 and in the 6th grade, I was hanging out with Cole on a Friday afternoon around the later part of May, and we were psyched at the start of the weekend. We'd wound up at his house since he didn't live too far from me, and at one point my mom called to say that our grandpa was in the hospital. While the issue with our grandpa wasn't expected to be life-threatening, he was kept at the hospital overnight for observation, and both my parents and Cole's parents were planning on staying with him and Grandma at the hospital, since my mom and her sister were the two of the siblings who lived close by. I was told that I was given the okay to stay at Cole's house for the night, with Cole's 15-year-old brother, who we'll call Hunter, being in charge while our parents were out. This was fine by us. I got along well enough with Hunter, and he was never the bossy older brother or cousin that some of my other friends said they had to put up with. We ordered out for pizza and enjoyed goofing off as boys did at that age. At around 9 or so, there was a knock at the front door, and Cole went to answer it. I was a bit curious as to who it could be at that time of night, and so I watched from a ways back. At the door were two older guys. They said that they were with the city, and they were investigating reports about the water pressure supposedly being bad in the neighborhood. They asked Cole if his parents were home, and when Cole said they were unavailable at the moment, which we were told to say to strangers if our parents weren't home, the guys started asking a bunch of questions about how the water pressure was in the house, and if they could come inside to check it. Hunter came over at that point and politely told the guys that the water pressure was fine, and perhaps they should move on to check on other homes in the neighborhood. The guys seemed reluctant to leave, but turned and walked away after Hunter started closing the door. After the door was shut, we looked at each other and shrugged, but didn't think too much of it after that, and went back to goofing off. Eventually, we decided to go to bed. Cole and Hunter shared a bedroom, and we all agreed that I'd sleep in there with them rather than me hitting the sack on the couch or something like that, so that we could talk while we fell asleep. And Hunter grabbed a sleeping bag out of their camping supplies for me. When we got into their bedroom, they stripped down to their briefs, and I remembered Cole had mentioned to me once a while back that they had started sleeping in just their underwear. Since I hadn't originally planned on staying the night, I hadn't brought anything with me from home as far as overnight stuff. But since I wasn't in the mood to sleep in my clothes, I stripped down to my briefs as well, though I felt a bit embarrassed, even though we were all guys there, and I knew that I wouldn't say anything or be judgmental. They climbed into their beds, and I quickly crawled into the sleeping bag, and after talking for a while about random stuff, we eventually fell asleep. Early the next morning, I got up because I had to pee, and so I quietly got out of the sleeping bag and went and did my business in the bathroom. On the way back to the bedroom, I heard something in the family room, which was on the opposite end of the house from the bedrooms, and particularly the bathroom I was using. I didn't pay too much attention to it at the time, thinking it must be either Cole or Hunter. until I got back into the bedroom and realized that both of them were still in there. Trying not to panic, I woke them up and told them that I thought someone was in the house. They quietly followed me, and the moment we walked into the family room, we saw the two guys from the night before in there. It was rather clear they were robbing the place. One of them started moving towards us as he pulled out a wicked-looking knife. The three of us probably raced to the front door, somehow managed to get it unlocked and open, and we fled outside. As luck would have it, a cop was driving by at that particular moment. We quickly flagged him down and told him about the two guys in the house. The cop called for backup, and within a couple of minutes, several other cops were there. They proceeded to enter the house, and after some searching, they caught the two guys. The cops figured out that the two guys must have entered from a window in the laundry room that had a broken latch, and had probably targeted that house. Because while it wasn't empty, they probably realized that there were no adults there, and figured that if we discovered them, we could be more easily dealt with than adults. To add insult to injury, while we were waiting outside while the cops searched the house, both to get the two guys and make sure that there was no one else with them, some of the neighbors came out to see what the commotion was, and this included some kids who went to the same school as Cole and I, including a few more who were in our 6th grade class with us. It was during that time that the three of us realized that we'd never had the chance to get dressed. So, just like in the stereotypical nightmare, we had to stand outside in full view of everyone in just our briefs for what seemed like forever before being allowed back inside. When we went back to school on Monday, Cole and I had to put up with more than just a bit of snickering, stares, and ribbing for the next few weeks until school ended for the summer.